Am I going to use this? Can everyone hear me okay? Is this fine? All right. Thank you, Dr. Friedman. Thank you for inviting me to come down, come down here today. I am a program officer with the Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program, and I'll describe a little bit more about what the research funding opportunities are there. I'm also a licensed psychologist, and I've conducted research in tobacco cessation among various priority groups. So I'll be focusing today on we're moving to nicotine. So I'm going to focus on menthol use in different priority groups. And no, we don't want to do that. Let's see. I got it.
There you go.
I think I got it.
Yeah. Push that. There you go.
All right.
Just push the main.
Cool. So just to start off, give people orientation. This is the wild mint plant. This plant has been used for many, many, many years for traditional healing practices. When people think of when they have a cold or cough or sore throat, you get a throat lozenge that has mint in it, mint tea. It's very medicinal. And it's been indigenously, it's been used throughout the Americas, and it's also been used in America or in Europe. Now, a lot of the mint that ends up in what are in cigarettes is synthesized, is synthetic menthol, and sometimes in Vicks Vapor Rub and certain chemicals, certain over-the-counter medications, you'll see menthol is a very popular ingredient. But it's more than just a flavor or a medicine. So let's see. Well, doesn't want to let me do that. So it is really, in terms of tobacco, it's the ultimate candy flavoring. And a big take-home message from this talk, if you don't remember anything, in terms of smoking tobacco, consuming combustible tobacco, menthol helps the poison go down easier. It is the chief constituent in peppermint oil, and it has that mint candy taste flavor that people like in their toothpaste and in certain desserts. But it also has this anesthetic effect, and it has a cooling sensation where subjectively on your skin it feels like it's cooling and even though, to the person, but when you do more physiological objective measures, the skin temperature has not changed. So it is really tapping the brain and tapping how we experience things in a different way. What this helps in terms of tobacco is it increases throat grab. It helps open up the bronchial and helps you take in tobacco smoke more deeply and hold tobacco smoke more longer for the user. It also masks the harshness of smoking. That thing where some people used to say you're a kid, the first cigarette is subversive, you're hacking your lungs up. With menthol, you don't get that. It helps that process. And it also has independent sensory activation of neurotransmitters that it handles on its own. I'm not a neuroscientist, but it definitely is interacting independently. It increases salivary flow and transbuccal drug absorption. So, through the cheeks, you can get it. It helps get through cells faster. It's very effective. Okay. So in terms of tobacco, all combustible tobacco products contain some level of menthol. It helps. When you have cured tobacco, it is really harsh. And they add chemicals, a lot of cancer-causing chemicals in there. And at least some level will have, like you see the .003, will have some amount of menthol. When we get into what's in red there, we're talking about the characterizing flavor of menthol. We're talking that experience when you inhale tobacco smoke of really saying this is a menthol experience. And you have a weak effect to strong effect. Some people like the heaviness of it when they smoke tobacco. Some people like a lighter effect of it. And some people might equate that to lighter versus regular cigarettes. But it is interesting that it increases the palatability of tobacco smoke. It's also in pipe tobacco and probably related to some of that sweet smell that people experience from smelling pipe tobacco, even secondhand. Now, I'm going to move forward now into talking about priority groups. And one of the most striking coups of the tobacco industry over the 30, 40 years was getting African Americans to prefer menthol cigarettes. And when we go back into the 50s, African Americans, for the most part, did not have a preference for menthol. And then as you go through the 60s, you go into the 70s, now we're at a place where we have 70 to 80% of African Americans smoking menthol cigarettes and preferring menthol. And what happened? So what happened is, and this is comparison, 70, 80% comparison to 25 to 30% of Caucasians, is menthol was the tobacco industry's effort to really, during the civil rights movement and during a era of black power, to really link itself to black culture. They did a masterful job, and I'll show some ads in a little bit, of really getting into, as African Americans were obtaining wealth and holding on to that wealth, linking themselves to some really deep cultural icons, and really positioning their advertisements in highly segregated urban environments, and really infiltrating the consumer market since the 60s. They also were tobacco industry were some of the first companies to provide high-level management positions to African Americans in some southern states, and they've contributed substantial monies to politicians from the state level all the way up to the federal level. So they really have a grip on us. In terms of advertising budget, when back before laws were passed that did not allow them to advertise cigarettes on TV, as you don't see any cigarette ads now on television, they used to dedicate 91% of their advertising budget to TV. They knew that was a way to get to young smokers, to get to people. But in terms of African Americans, they used male actors with more African American features. They tripled cigarette advertising in ebony and also in jet. They had catchphrases that acquainted with cultural icons and idioms, such as menthol's got a brand new bag. They connected with the cool jazz movement, the cool lexicon overall, and they did philanthropic efforts in African American communities to say, look, we're giving back, we're giving back. So this helped keep legislators that were African American, the Black Caucus, Congressional Black Caucus, and NAACP and Urban League to put their hands back when menthol came up as a public health issue. So this is one ad. I like to show ads. Cool ain't cold, Newport is. There you go, a whole new bag of menthol. This is Newport. This is from a 1970 Ebony magazine ad. Cool jazz festivals for 1981, they would post ads highlighting the different artists and where the cool jazz festivals would occur. There's another ad there from Cool. Cool was really strong, especially in the 70s. Now Newport is the #1 menthol brand used by consumers in the US. Newport Pleasure, they put ads like this in inner city environments, really impoverished areas, so you had this drastic difference from the life that people live, and this equating, if I smoke this, I'm getting closer to having fun, a different life, taking pictures that might have been acquainted with Caucasians in previous ads and having African Americans in them. Of course, nightlife, the bar culture, that's where the tobacco industry is really based and grounded right now, especially among young adults. Stirring the senses, something very relaxing. This will take you there. This will take you away from hearing what's going outside your window. And linking to hip-hop culture. Cool has done this. You buy multiple packs. You can put together a storyboard. There are, of course, promotional things that go with this to keep people using and wanting and saying, hey, this is a cigarette to go to. Like I said, the nightlife and club atmosphere in Newport has come back and has continued to have very strong ads in that area. And before we banned candy-flavored cigarettes, they were experimenting with, this is a menthol mocha-flavored cigarette. So they were experimenting with adding raspberry and mint and different fruit flavors in the tobacco products, trying to target a younger audience, a younger market. So today, who uses menthol cigarettes? We estimate this is data from National Survey Study of Drug Use and Health, put out by SAMHSA every year. At least it's estimated that over 1 million underage adolescents smoke menthol, and over 18 million adults. And among women, among female smokers, 52% smoke menthol. So it is a little bit more common among women than men overall. Now let's look at adults. Again, this is data from that same survey from 2004 to 2008. If you look at the rates of menthol use among adults in the US, nationally representative sample, you see those rates among African Americans are very high, and they've sustained very high in the 2000s. Then Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders also have, I would say, the next highest rate of menthol use. A lot of advertising in Hawaii, and I saw a lot of advertising in Guam for menthol and availability. But also people identify as multiracial smoke at very high rates. And then you see among the other ethnic minority groups, at least for this analysis, that they were similar to Caucasians in use. So I did an analysis and published this paper in 2012 looking at the NISDA data, National Study of Drug Use and Health, from 2008 to 2009. And one of the striking things is that I found was this much higher rate of menthol use among Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. And what happens in some of these surveys, because Pacific Islanders are a smaller ethnic group and they might not really oversample appropriately, is you see these estimates go up and down between different epidemiological studies that come out there. But as you can see, very high rates, at least among those two, among African Americans and Native Hawaiians from that analysis we did. And I'll revisit that. In terms of for youth, menthol is the starter tobacco product. This is what kids go to. You see that top bar right there between 2004 to 2008, it shows menthol use rates in the past month among 12 to 17-year-olds. And then as you go to 18 to 25, it's high, but a little bit higher. As you go to over 26, it's a little bit lower. So really what we're seeing is this is helping kids initiate tobacco use. And not all of them will stay with menthol, but they will start with it. In terms of minority groups, and this is just focused on middle and high school students from another national survey from 2002, as you can see, the younger kids, the main point here is the younger kids, except for African Americans, are smoking menthol, this, driving home the argument that it's a starter tobacco product. Now, looking at youth 12 to 17 years old who were in this national survey that is kind of our go-to for drug use behaviors in the U.S., as you can see, African Americans very high, and I've seen quite a few surveys that show multiracial, people who identify as being multiracial, it's also very high. But across all ethnicities and races, you see it's higher than for their adult counterparts. Okay, so this is that some kids, even if they're white kids, are smoking menthol, and maybe when they're adults, they go to non-menthols. In terms of our people of Hispanic origin, and I don't have other Latino ethnic groups on here, but the striking message here and what I wanted to show is that the rates of menthol use among Puerto Ricans is just very, very high. And I've not really seen a good argument for why that is, but it's higher than even if you go to Cuba, other parts of the Caribbean, and other parts of Latin America. In terms of Mexican Americans, you usually see the rates similar to whites, if not a little bit lower, but they're really, statistically, there's not a difference there. In terms of Hawaiian youth, this is from a tobacco survey from Hawaii, you have the rates of the cigarette prevalence there for those years, which are high of themselves. But menthol, 2000 to 2009 among Hawaiian youth is very high. It's the preferred cigarette. And in Hawaii and Guam and the Pacific Islands, Kool is still higher, more the preferred cigarette than Newport. Newport is more among African Americans in the U.S. Now let's look at Filipinos. In the Philippines, this is market data from 2007, menthol cigarettes constituted 55% of the market. And there they have, their most popular brands are Marlboro Menthol Lights and Philip Morris menthols. Even though they're both made by Philip Morris, also called Altria, in that market they separate them out into two products. And also cigarettes overall in the Philippines have more tar and more nicotine, 76% more tar than imported brands. So these are even more dangerous in terms of health effects, in terms of getting that poison in there and leading to long-term health problems, cardiovascular and cancer down the road. I've been interested, and some of my colleagues have been interested in really what is going on with menthol in people with mental illness. And I conducted a clinical trial at San Francisco General Hospital in inpatient psychiatry focused on tobacco cessation. That's a safety net hospital with a majority ethnically diverse sample. And I saw a lot of menthol use, even among the Caucasians in that study. And so what we did is we combined, this is some work I've done with Dr. Judith Prochaska and Kelly Young-Wolf, that we combined across different clinical samples, psychiatric samples, looking at 1,000 California smokers. We found a 57% menthol smoking rate, and that's across ethnicities. All of these were people who were dealing with acute mental illness because they were hospitalized in a psychiatric setting. And that is in comparison to the 24% menthol prevalence in the general California population. So what's going on here? This sample was majority racial ethnic minority, uninsured, and low income, and I have a little description about 30% of psychotic disorders, major depression, and bipolar. And we also found correlates in terms of patients of younger age, racial ethnic minority status, and diagnosed with a psychotic disorder appear particularly vulnerable to menthol use. In terms of, we did another study that I talked about some data a little bit ago, looking at the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, and we looked at psychological distress. And it's more of a general psychological malaise type of measure, the Kessler-6. And it can be divided empirically. It's been tested, so it's psychometrically, this is sound, into severe psychological distress, moderate, and mild. And as you see, there's kind of this trend there where you have the more psychological distress you have, the more this proxy for mental illness, the higher menthol that's being consumed, the higher menthol prevalence that you see. So the rates are higher there. And also high rates among African Americans, Native Hawaiians, people with less education and income, unmarried and uninsured. So what really some of the take home from this is that persons with mental health problems could potentially benefit from the regulation or banning of menthol. And the reason I'm getting it, and I'll tell you why I'm getting to that point in a minute. I'm going to go back, I know I'm jumping around, but I'm going to go back to the predatory marketing practices going on. Lisa Henriksen at Stanford did this study looking at geography, showing that place matters. And if you look at communities that, she's created really strong models doing this, that have high schools with African-American students, if you look at the proportion of African-American students, high school students enrolled in those schools, as that enrollment increases, the menthol ads near those schools also increase. So they're targeting kids. They're these are the 7-Elevens across the street from schools, and they're putting more ads there so the kids have this exposure even though they might be buying candy and other products while they're at those stores. Also, for each 10% increase in the proportion of African American students, the discount for Newports is 1.5 times greater. The proportion of menthol advertising, as I said before, increased by 6%. And the promotions were 42% higher. So sometimes this is a buy one, get one free kind of thing. And this is how the industry is spending a lot of its marketing monies now. And the cost of Newports was 12 cents lower. So that's incrementally as you go up each 10% increase in African American student enrollment. So the reason I talked about banning and possibly regulating menthol is because we have the FDA now has a Center for Tobacco Products that can regulate menthol. And President Obama signed in 2009 the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act. It gives the FDA broad authority to regulate constituents in tobacco products and reduce even the level of nicotine in tobacco products. And also not permit or allow certain new products on the market. Menthol received a special carve-out in terms of all other fruit-flavored cigarettes, the mocha flavored I showed you earlier, the cherry, strawberry, were banned based on minimal scientific research, actually. And we have considerably more research supporting the negative public health impact of menthol, yet it was allowed to stay, and the Congressional Black Caucus was able to get into this bill a provision that would constitute a scientific advisory committee called the Tobacco Products Scientific Advisory Committee, or TPSAC. And they would look at all the scientific literature and evidence and spend a defined amount of time to see what is the impact of menthol on public health. Is it really causing problems? Is it above and beyond what we see from non-menthol, which, depending on how you ask that question and answer, can get you in trouble. But this is about the TPSAC that was established in 2009. 15 members, 3 of them were tobacco industry folks, but they did not vote. And this is when they had public hearings, and they delivered a report in March of 2011. And what did the report say? It said basically the removal of menthol cigarettes from the marketplace would greatly benefit public health in the United States. Because menthol increases tobacco initiation, it retards cessation, especially among African Americans, but it retards cessation among other groups too. But evidence-wise, we know for African Americans, menthol cigarettes are marketed disproportionately to younger smokers and disproportionately marketed per capita to African Americans. But where we are right now is these recommendations, this was a recommendation from a scientific body. The FDA has still not moved forward with deeming regulation in terms of menthol. And we're at this point where the U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services is not required, does not have a timeline to make a decision in regards to menthol. And there have been periods of open comment, and you could submit scientific evidence, and colleagues and scientists have been doing this, but there hasn't been really a push. So in terms of at the federal level. So this could go on for a very long time. In the industry, tobacco industry comes in and always lengthens these times, and of course, whatever regulation will end up in litigation at some level, I'm sure. But where we're at now is there are some local efforts to protect certain priority groups from menthol. Chicago passed the Chicago City Council passed a law to create a 500-foot buffer around schools where menthol cannot, or other flavored tobacco products cannot be sold. So that is where, in terms of the advocacy, the work, it's going in that direction. And then, of course, letter writing, the Delta Sigma Theta wrote a letter to FDA supporting the banning of menthol and went through a process. So other major groups, especially African-American organizations that can support this effort, it would really greatly drive home that message. Because the science is there, it's very strong and convincing, but yet the political will is lagging right now. Okay, so I said, what's at stake? And I put my young man here in front of a convenience store surrounded by tobacco ads. So just for everyone to keep in mind, that's what kids are exposed to. So that's my one hat as a researcher. Now my other hat as a program officer is to talk about funding opportunities available at the Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program. And what is TRDRP? We're a state-focused tobacco research program created by Prop $99. It's passed in 1988, and it resulted in a 25-cent per cigarette surtax. And 5 cents of each dollar of that surtax collected goes into a research account, and that's what my office manages. We dole out the money to researchers at various levels of training. And we don't, in terms of administrative costs, we can't dip more than 5% into it. So 95% of it is strictly dedicated to research, and it's for California investigators or trainees and for the benefit of Californians. So we're fortunate to have a few little pots of money like this in the state to conduct research and to support research. We fund academics, community folks, if they're 501c3 nonprofit status, and school researchers, including postdocs and doctoral dissertation candidates in California. The research results must benefit Californians or the state as a whole, or public health of the state. And we are located at the University of California Office of the President, which is in downtown Oakland. This is our budget since as far back as it went, from 1988. As you can see, back when people were smoking a lot more, and we had a lot more dollars coming in. Now California has the second lowest smoking rate, and those dollars don't quite have the buying power that they used to have in 1989. That little dip in the 90s was when Pete Wilson and the Republican-run legislature took some of that money, and it went through litigation, and it had to be returned. So that's why you see that increase over there in the late 90s to 2000. But since 2001, we really have been on a decline in terms of funds, and a lot of that has to do with the smoking prevalence going down, which is good, that's what we want, and more recently even with electronic cigarettes on the market, which are non-tax, but we're still getting research grants to fund that. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there in what the state wants to do with electronic cigarettes. That's another talk and issue. So our goal is to fund research that enhances our understanding of tobacco prevalence, prevention, and cessation, as well as the social, psychological, cultural, and biological, as well as genetic, economic, and policy-related aspects of tobacco use and tobacco-related diseases in California communities. So this is our mandate. It's very broad, and we fund research from the biomedical sciences through the social sciences and policy sciences also. In terms of our research priorities currently, and this is where they stand, we have 5 priorities in no particular order, and the one that might appeal to some folks in this room is we have a specific priority to prevent and treat tobacco use, promote equity among disproportionately impacted California communities, studies on the basic neuroscience of nicotine addiction, advance policies to reduce environmental exposure to the toxic effects of tobacco smoke and tobacco waste, tobacco butts are the most popular form of waste, and they get in our waterways, and they have chemicals that kill marine life and cause a whole bunch of other problems, as well as start fires. So we have a broad charge with limited resources to address major issues in the state. Also, other priorities include expanding the scientific basis to inform the regulation of nicotine and tobacco. Thank you. And this is to inform the FDA. The FDA has funded these T-Cores, which are focused on regulatory science, but we're trying to cover areas that the FDA doesn't want to touch. Advance innovative research in the early diagnosis of tobacco-related diseases. If you catch lung cancer earlier, people have a longer survival rate versus when you wait to late-stage lung cancer. Right now, we have a special initiative to fund grants dealing with barriers to lung cancer, early detection, and prevention among disproportionately impacted populations. That's from the California Cancer Research Tax Fund. It's a voluntary income contribution that people do on their state income taxes. So we hold those dollars for 2 years, and then we're opening that up for actually this where we are right now, but it won't be open again until I think available until 2016. And then finally, I think this is the last one, advance the ability of communities throughout California to assess and limit the influence of the tobacco industry. So like the research you saw earlier about place matters, geography matters, grants to see what are some of the structural environmental factors as well as the marketing influences of the tobacco industry. So I say this, and this is an unusual time to be here giving this talk. Today is a day when our letters of intent are due for grants to be submitted in December. So the timing is a little off unless people across the room have submitted a letter of intent. What the letter of intent is a holding place where we review and make sure it aligns with our priorities, and then we open that up for people to submit a full grant application. But since today is the day that's due, I'll go through. It's due at noon today, yeah. So 10 minutes ago. But if anyone during lunch wants to talk with me, if someone has submitted or had not clicked the submit button, we can talk. In terms of our grant mechanisms, I'm going to briefly go over this, but we're also entering into a strategic planning process, so these will likely change next year. The priorities won't in a major form, but they will get more focused. So the Research Project Award is our flagship grant mechanism. It's an R01 equivalent for those who know the NIH vernacular for grant mechanisms. So these are rigorously developed and designed and executed grant proposals. And they're up to 3 years, $375,000 direct costs over those years. Indirect costs are added on top of those direct costs. Then if someone has just an idea that needs proof of concept, it's exploratory, developmental, we have a 2-year pilot XT mechanism that's $200,000 direct costs over 2 years. For folks who do community-based participatory research, we have 2 mechanisms. We call them our CARAs and our SARAs. CARAs are Community Academic Research Awards, and SARAs are based in the schools. They're school-based tobacco prevention or cessation studies. And for the SARAs, the California Department of Education kicks in for a pilot an additional $30,000 per year, and for a full an additional $100,000 per year. So those can be even more substantial grants with the state's Department of Education contribution. But we also support postdocs, as you see, dissertations. I don't see that going anywhere. But these aren't set in stone right now because we're going to strategically plan where we should focus our efforts with our limited dollars. This is my last slide, or next to last. Key dates in terms of funding, at least where we stand now. If folks are interested in applying, don't have the ideas quite formulated, we can talk. But our next letter of intent opportunity would be due, the deadline would be July 1 of 2015 the call would go out July 1 of 2015. The LOIs would be due mid-September, so pretty much this day next year. And grant proposals due December 1 with an award start date of July 1 of the following year. So if anyone has any questions, I will be around for lunch to talk with folks, or feel free to email or call me.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yes,
great talk. So we can have time for questions both about the menthol part of his talk and about the training opportunities. Maybe I'll start with a question a little bit. Sure. What do you think about trying to raise the age of smoking to 21?
That's an interesting.
Is that something on you guys' horizon, or is that we do grants on that, or?
Well, I think that's a policy research question, and what would be the impact on health of changing the law to 21? New York City has done that. I have not seen a policy analysis on the impact of that, but I think that just occurred beginning of this year. So in terms of a priority for California, raising the age is not really on our radar right now. And I think part of it has to do with youth being able to get access to cigarettes even less than 18. I've worked with kids, and 80%, we've done surveys, 80% say they go into a convenience store and buy them. So they just know where to get them. So I don't necessarily think raising it will make that difference, but yeah, in terms of legislative action, attention, that's not where we are right now.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions for you. Sure, sure. Within your research fund, is there anything available for health education?
Health education related to tobacco?
Yes.
With students or with youth or?
With youth, yes.
Okay, so with youth, there are two different ways. So the Department of Education has a program called the TUPE program. It's Tobacco Use Prevention and Education. And they give monies out to school districts. They'll have usually a representative that is involved in educating students in schools, creating a curriculum. So that's where a lot of the Proposition 99 dollars are focused. Now, when we fund research, when we fund grants, it's more a research question. So if someone wants to look at the impact of what we're doing, what we've been doing for 15 plus years on youth use or not using, then we can support that. But strict education probably is a little bit outside our purview because the Department of Ed is really focused there. Yeah.
Yeah. Hello. Oh, I found the targeted ads very scary, and I just wanted to say that the neuroscience behind what you describe, psychostimulant exposure changes reward pathways for natural rewards like sucrose, sugar, sweet,
right.
And the fact that they're being introduced and marketed to young people is really just scary. Thank you very much for your talk.
Yes, you're welcome. It is. And it's scarier that in terms of our policymakers, there's been a special carve-out for menthol. Why was there a carve-out when people could say, yeah, chocolate-flavored cigarette is probably not a good idea to have on the market, right? But menthol, which is also a flavoring, is. So there are larger discrimination, other factors, and political and lobbying factors at play there.
It's very interesting to see that basically they are lowering the dose of nicotine. If you lower the dose of nicotine, basically what they do is they smoke more cigarettes to obtain the same reward.
Right. Don't
you think it would be reasonable to actually increase the concentration of nicotine so by the time they just have one cigarette, that is good enough for them? And also that because at higher doses, actually, nicotine produces aversion. And that's the reason when you start nicotine first time, you don't want to use it. Some people, because of that one exposure, they do not want to use it anymore. So it would be a better idea, actually, to increase the concentration of nicotine. So if they can just use only one cigarette a day, maybe, and that's enough, rather than exposing to those all other chemicals. The more cigarette you use, the more chemicals you're going to be exposed to.
That's a controversial issue, but I understand what you're saying. For non-menthols, I think that aversion therapy or hypothesis, it holds stronger. Because menthol is really masking so many negative aspects, at least experiential aspects of tobacco smoking. you're going to get the situation and I've seen data on the levels of nicotine. Some menthol brands have more nicotine than Marlboro regulars, than non-menthols. So it is, in a way, the industry can say, let's see if we can get people more hooked. Now, you can give someone a super high dose that makes them nauseous, lightheaded, and maybe even throw up. And probably an industry is not going to create a product that would do that. It's not going to sell very well. So, there's this in-between part of, yes, if you took, in surveys that have been done, when you ask people, what would you do if menthol was taken away from the market, immediately you have at least 30% saying they quit. And you have another group, 20-some%, that says they might go to non-menthol. If you ask African Americans, should menthol be banned from, should we ban menthol, up to 70% say yes. So it's kind of interesting that this is a product that's primarily used by African American smokers, but when you even interview African American smokers, many are in favor of banning it. So it's a link, it's an addiction to nicotine and menthol too, and how to disentangle that. That's tricky.
Thank you very much for your talk. I sometimes am very curious about potentially negative effects of these public health things that we do, because I think they're very important, and I certainly agree that preventing smoking and stopping smoking is important. But if you drive, for example, around our university or many other communities that are similar to it, you will find these small little businesses that are built up just to sell cigarettes. You will find people who sell cigarettes on the street. You will find convenience stores where people buy cigarettes one at a time. You know the story of the man in New York who was killed by police. He was a father of 5. He was selling cigarettes. Yeah. And I can't, and then you also look at our communities, and there are very few, these civic communities, there's very few sort of positive outlets for just spending time dealing with stress, dealing with the stress of living in those communities. So we take away these things, and I just wonder, is that part of your research? Is that part of what your agency would be even researching to assess, to what extent are these potentially negative effects coming out, and how can we ameliorate them? Yeah,
no, it's a very good point. These are unintended consequences, and I think removing menthol could definitely have unintended consequences. In terms of research, that is something we're interested in funding. This could be focus group, qualitative type work where you're really getting community perspectives on what might be some of the longer-term economic impact of taking menthol away. Regular tobacco will still be there. And as the price of tobacco has gone up, there are more fights. People have more fights on the street about, because people don't want to just give someone a cigarette. That's now a pricey product right there. So, and that occurs across race and ethnicity. But I could see, even in low-income communities, that even raising the price. I mean, I don't know, when New York went, when they raised their price, was it $12 a pack for New York City? And there was that story about there was a fight. It's a tax on poor people, right? Well, see, this is a political issue. So this is what the industry drives home. It is that people, if you raise it, they'll spend their money on tobacco and not on other things. But we don't have any data to support that. So that's when NAACP has released things, don't support these tax increases on tobacco, but it's health-wise, it's devastating our communities. And African Americans die disproportionately from lung cancer. African American men die so much more disproportionately from lung cancer. So we have a big public health epidemic, and you can't say, well, 1 or 2 people who smoke a tobacco product are going to die. We know this, 50% mortality rate. So you can't say that, well, we should let people smoke. Even people with mental illness, well, they don't have anything else. You're taking their one thing away from them, but you're also allowing them to kill themselves. It's a gradual suicide. So,
fascinating dilemma. We can discuss this more at lunch. I want to thank Norval for coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Bert.
I want to welcome